Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened healing rejection power and got married to Orihime? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Scar That Will Not Mend. The air was thin and tasted of ozone and static, a cocktail Naruto had come to associate with tearing holes in reality. Below, the ground was a jagged ruin of white, bone-like struck churish that seemed to grow from the barren rock like a skeletal forest. This was not the elemental nations. This was a pocket dimension, a leftover shard of Kagaya's power, and it was actively hostile to life. Anything on your end, Sasuke? Naruto's voice was calm, a low command that cut through the whistling wind. He stood poised on the edge of a chalky precipice, his sage mode pigmentation stark against his skin. His senses were flared wide, tasting the bitter, sterile chakra of this place and the far more venomous signatures of their targets. A flicker of movement to his left, and Sasuke Uchiha materialized from a swirl of space-time, his single Rinnegan a silent testament to the power he now wielded. He gave a short, sharp shake of his head. They're phasing, not teleporting, slipping between the folds of this dimension. It makes them difficult to pin down. Annoying, was Sakura Haruno's clipped assessment. She landed beside them, a whisper of displaced dust her only announcement. Her fists were clenched, green chakra humming faintly around them, ready to shatter bone or mend it with equal proficiency. Their jutsu feel wrong. It's like they're using rotted chakra. Naruto nodded, his gaze sweeping the desolate landscape. They're Kagaya's will, given form. Less like shinobi, more like antibodies for a dead goddess. They don't want to win. They just want to erase us. He had matured in the years since the war's end. The boisterous, knuckle-headed ninja was still there, buried under a new layer of quiet confidence and the heavy mantle of being the world's savior. He was no longer just a fighter. He was a commander, a strategist, and his presence on the battlefield was a calming anchor for his comrades. The attack came without warning. Not from the front, but from the very fabric of the dimension. The white, bony trees suddenly elongated, sharpening into spears that shot towards them from every conceivable angle. Sakura, Naruto barked. She didn't need the order. With a roar, she slammed her fist into the ground. The force didn't just crack the earth, it sent a shockwave of pure, focused chakra erupting outwards. The bone spears shattered into a million pieces. A wave of destruction meeting a wave of annihilation. But it was a diversion. From the shimmering air behind them, three figures coalesced. They were pale, featureless beings with long, white hair and empty sockets for eyes. Clad in the same funereal robes as the Zetsu army. They didn't use hand seals. One simply pointed, and a volley of obsidian black rods, harder than steel, screamed through the air. Sasuke was already moving. His Chikudo flashed, a blur of silver deflecting the rods with a series of high-pitched shrieks. At the same time, his Rinnegan flared. A Menetejikara. In an instant, he switched places with the lead attacker. The pale being found itself directly in the path of its own comrade's attack, impaled by a dozen of the black rods. It didn't scream. It simply dissolved into a cloud of white, corrosive dust. Naruto was a blur of orange and gold. He entered his six-paths sage mode, the truth-seeking orbs behind him shifting into a protective shield that intercepted another volley. He flowed forward, a golden comet closing the distance in a heartbeat. One of the remaining loyalists thrust its hand forward, its arm elongating into a wickedly sharp blade of bone. Naruto twisted, letting the blade graze his side, the fabric of his jacket tearing. It was a shallow cut, a nuisance. He ignored it, his focus absolute. His hand came up, a Rasengan spiraling into existence, compressed and violent. He slammed it into the creature's chest. The impact was silent but devastating. The loyalist didn't fly back. It was simply erased from existence, consumed by the vortex of pure chakra. The final loyalist shrieked, a sound like tearing silk, and tried to phase out. It was too slow. A shadow stretched from Naruto's feet, impossibly fast, and snaked around the creature's ankle. Shikamaru wasn't here, but Naruto had learned a few things. It wasn't the Nara clan's jutsu, but a simple application of yin release chakra to give his shadow substance. The creature was anchored. It stared at Naruto with its empty eye sockets, and for a moment, a sliver of Kagaya's malevolent will flared within them. A voice, ancient and cold, echoed not in the air, but directly in Naruto's mind. Anomaly. You break the cycle. You will be unmade. Then Sasuke's blade, wreathed in black Amaterasu flames, slid through its neck. The creature's head fell, dissolving into black fire and white dust before it could hit the ground. The battle was over. The silence that descended was heavier than the fight itself. The dimension began to groan, the bone-like structures crumbling. Their anchor, the loyalists, were gone. This pocket of reality was collapsing. Time to go, Sasuke said, his Rinnegan already swirling as he prepared the portal. Sakura rushed to Naruto's side. You're hurt. Naruto glanced down at the tear in his jacket. A thin, red line marked his skin, barely beading with blood. It's a scratch, Sakura-chan. I've had worse from forgetting to shave. He grinned, the easy, bright expression that had reassured so many over the years. She rolled her eyes, but a smile touched her lips. Still an idiot. Hold still. She began to gather her medical ninjutsu. Let's get home first, Naruto said, clapping a hand on her shoulder. This place gives me the creeps. Sasuke opened the portal, a swirling vortex of black that led back to the familiar green of the Land of Fire. They stepped through, leaving the dying dimension to implode into nothingness behind them. The mission was a success. Another loose end from the war tied up. Just another day for the heroes of Konoha. The walk back to the village was quiet, the adrenaline of battle fading into a familiar, bone-deep weariness. The sun was warm on their faces, a welcome contrast to the cold sterility of Kagaya's dimension. Construction sounds echoed from the distance, the rhythmic clang of hammers and the shouts of workers. Konoha was still healing, still rebuilding, but it was alive and vibrant. Every new building was a testament to their victory, a symbol of the peace they had fought so hard to secure. Naruto waved at a group of carpenters as they passed, receiving a chorus of cheerful greetings in return. Naruto-sama, glad you're back safe. He was a hero, a living legend, but in these moments, he was just Naruto, a comforting and familiar presence. The weight of that adoration used to feel heavy, but now it felt like a warm cloak. It was his purpose. They reported to the Hokage's tower, Kakashi listening with his usual languid focus, his single visible eye conveying all the necessary seriousness. Kagaya loyalists, troublesome, Kakashi said, leaning back in his chair. It seems her will is more persistent than we thought. Good work, all of you. You've prevented a potential incursion. He gave them a nod. Go, rest. You've earned it. As they turned to leave, Sakura stopped. Wait, Naruto, your side. Let me heal it now. Right. Naruto lifted the tattered edge of his jacket. The cut was still there, a thin, angry-looking line. What was strange was that it hadn't bled any further. It looked exactly as it had moments after it happened. Kurama's healing factor, which could ally piece him back together from near-fatal wounds in seconds, seemed to be ignoring it. That's odd, Sakura murmured, her brow furrowing in concentration. Your healing should have closed that instantly. They stepped into an empty office nearby. Maybe I'm just tired, Naruto offered, though he didn't believe it. He felt a strange nothingness from the wound. Not pain, not numbness. Just an absence. Hold still, Sakura commanded, her professional medic persona taking over. She placed her hands over the cut, palms hovering a few inches above his skin. A soft, gentle green light emanated from them. The signature of the mystical palm technique. The moment the chakra touched his skin, something went terribly wrong. The green light didn't soak into the wound. It recoiled, sizzling like water on a hot skillet. Sakura gasped, pulling her hands back as if she'd been burned. The chakra flickered and died. What was that? Naruto asked, his voice sharp with concern. He looked at her hands. Her palms were red, as if she had pressed them against a searing hot plate. I don't know, she stammered, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Your body, it's not just resisting the healing. It's rejecting it, aggressively. It felt like my chakra was being corroded. Sasuke, who had been leaning silently against the doorframe, pushed off the wall. His Sharingan spun to life, his gaze analytical. He looked from Sakura's hands to the wound on Naruto's side. He saw the flow of chakra, or rather, the lack of it. The chakra around the wound is dead, he stated flatly. It's not circulating. It's just stopped. Naruto looked down at the cut again. It was no longer just a red line. The edges were darkening, turning a strange, unhealthy-looking black, like the first sign of frostbite. But there was no cold, no pain. It was simply changing. A knot of ice formed in Naruto's stomach. This was new. This was wrong. Try again, he said, his voice harder than he intended. Naruto, I don't think that's a good idea. Sakura protested, cradling her hands. It hurt. Please, he said, his tone softening. Just be careful. Hesitantly, Sakura reached out again. This time, she channeled her chakra with extreme precision, forming it into a delicate tendril of light. She didn't try to flood the area, but to gently coax the cells to regenerate. The tendril touched the edge of the blackened skin. The result was instantaneous and violent. The tendril of green chakra didn't just sizzle, it was consumed. A wisp of black, vaporous energy, thin as smoke, rose from the wound and snuffed out the healing light. Sakura cried out, stumbling back, clutching her hand. This time, a small, angry blister was already forming on her index finger. Enough! Sasuke's voice was a command. He stepped forward, his hand on Sakura's shoulder, pulling her further away. His gaze was locked on Naruto's side, his expression grim. This isn't a normal injury. Naruto's heart hammered in his chest. He looked at the blister on Sakura's finger, a direct result of trying to help him. He had hurt her, not with a punch or a Rasengan, but with a wound. The very idea was grotesque. I need to see Tsunade Bachin, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The atmosphere in the private medical lab beneath the Hokage Tower was thick with tension. Tsunade Senju, the legendary Sannin and the world's greatest medical ninja, stared at the wound on Naruto's side with an expression of profound, academic fury. She had dismissed Sakura's initial report as an exaggeration, a consequence of exhaustion. Now, seeing it for herself, she was silent. Kakashi stood nearby, his arms crossed, his usual relaxed posture gone. Shikamaru was there too, his sharp mind already calculating a dozen different terrifying possibilities. Sakura stood back, her hands now bandaged, a living testament to the danger. The wound had evolved. It was no longer a thin line. It was now a stark, black scar, about 3 inches long, looking as if it had been etched onto his skin with a shard of obsidian. It wasn't scabbed over or inflamed. It was perfect, clean, and utterly permanent. I have never seen anything like this, Tsunade finally said, her voice a low growl of frustration. She had a diagnostic tool in her hand, a device that measured cellular activity and chakra flow. The readings were nonsensical. The cells aren't damaged. They aren't dead. According to this, they are in a state of absolute, unchanging stasis. They refuse to accept any new information. They are perfectly, irreversibly, wounded. She leaned closer, her own chakra flaring as she prepared to make her own attempt. Her mystical palm was leagues beyond Sakura's. It could regenerate entire organs. Granny, don't, Naruto warned, his voice tight. It burned Sakura. I'm not Sakura, Tsunade snapped, though her eyes softened for a moment at his concern. She placed her hand over the scar, and the room was flooded with a powerful, emerald green light. The sheer density of the chakra was staggering. It was the pinnacle of medical ninjutsu. And it did absolutely nothing. There was no sizzle, no violent rejection. Tsunade's chakra simply parted around the scar, like water flowing around a stone. It refused to touch it, refused to interact. She pushed harder, pouring more and more power into the technique. The green light intensified until it was almost blinding. Then, a flicker, a line of black energy, thin as a spider's thread, lashed out from the scar. It didn't aim for her hand, but for the creation rebirth seal on her forehead. Tsunade jerked back as if struck by lightning, her face pale. The diamond-shaped seal on her brow had wavered for a split second, the stored chakra within it shuddering. What in the hells? She breathed, staring at her own trembling hands. It targeted my seal. It's not just rejecting healing, it's actively hostile to the concept of regeneration itself. Shikamaru, who had been silent until now, spoke up. It's a conceptual power. Then, not a jutsu that damages, but one that defines a state of being. The state of wounded is now the absolute property of that part of your body. His shadow. User's mind was adept at thinking in abstract terms. Naruto. What happens if you touch someone? The question hung in the air, cold and heavy. All eyes turned to Naruto. His jovial confidence was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had brought peace, the hands that had saved countless lives, and for the first time, he saw them as a potential curse. We don't know, Naruto answered, his throat dry, and I'm not willing to find out. Kakashi finally spoke, his voice grave. This stays in this room. No one outside of us can know. Not until we understand what this is. The political fallout alone. If word got out that Naruto Uzumaki can inflict wounds that cannot be healed, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The hero of the world would become its most feared threat overnight. I'll isolate myself, Naruto said immediately. The decision was instant, decisive. It wasn't a question. Effective immediately. No physical contact with anyone. I'll stay in my apartment. I can use clones for anything I need to do in the village. Naruto, you can't just lock yourself away, Sakura protested, her voice filled with anguish. I can, and I will, he retorted, his gaze firm. I hurt you, Sakura-chan, just by you trying to help me. What if I stumbled in a crowd? What if I reached out to stop a kid from falling? I will not take that risk. Not with anyone. His tone brooked no argument. This was not the plea of a scared boy. It was the command of a leader making a hard, necessary choice to protect his people. Tsunade, Kakashi, and even Sasuke could see the iron resolve in his eyes. He was containing himself. Later that evening, the sounds of Konoha's nightlife seemed a world away. Naruto sat in the sterile quiet of his apartment. It was a spacious place, a gift from the village. But tonight it felt like a prison cell. He had sent a clone to Ichiraku for ramen, and the real him sat at the table, staring at the untouched bowl. He wasn't hungry. He held his hand over the steam rising from the broth. He imagined his touch turning the warm soup cold and inert. He imagined picking up the ceramic bowl and it cracking, the fissure spreading in black, unfixable lines. He snatched his hand back, a tremor running through him. A deep, rumbling voice echoed in the cavernous space of his mind. This is a foul power, Kit. It was Kurama. The nay-tailed fox's presence was usually a furnace of power and begrudging affection. Now, it was subdued, wary. You feel it too. Naruto projected his thoughts inward. I feel it, Kurama confirmed. The chakra is yours, but it's been tainted. Corrupted by whatever that thing's attack was. It's not just an injury. It's like a seed has been planted. A seed of finality. It feels ancient, colder and more absolute than death itself. Death is a transition. This is an ending. A full stop. Naruto closed his eyes, leaning his head back. A full stop. That's what it felt like. A piece of his own body had simply ceased to be part of the living, flowing world. It was a monument to a single moment of damage. He thought of his friends. He thought of Hinata's shy smiles, of Shikamaru's exasperated sighs, of Iruka Sensei's proud and steady presence. The simple, casual touches of friendship, a hand on the shoulder, a shared high five, a hug, were all gone. He was a son, they had called him, a source of warmth for the world. Now, he felt like a black hole, a patch of cold that could extinguish any light that got too close. The loneliness was a physical ache, more profound than any battle wound he had ever suffered. He was surrounded by people who loved him, in a village that revered him, and he had never felt more alone. He was an island, and the waters around him were poison. He pushed the ramen away and moved to the center of his living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor. He had to understand this. He had to face it. Closing his eyes, he delved inward, past the roaring furnace of Kurama's chakra. Past the swirling energies of the six paths, and focused on the single point of cold wrongness in his side. He reached out to it with his senses. The moment he made contact, a wave of profound desolation washed over him. It was the feeling of absolute stillness, of irreversible decay. It was the silence of a dead universe. This power wasn't just about rejecting healing, it was about enforcing an end. It was the embodiment of the phrase, "What is done cannot be undone." He felt a terrifying temptation within it. The sheer, ultimate authority of it. The power to make any injury, any damage, absolute. It was a weapon beyond anything he had ever conceived. A single touch could cripple a god. The thought was intoxicating and horrifying in equal measure. He recoiled from it, sealing his senses off, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This was a poison, not just to his body, but to his soul. He sat there for hours, the moon climbing high in the sky, a silver disk in the window. The silence of the apartment was absolute. He was adrift in a sea of his own making, lost and untouchable. And then, he felt it. It was impossibly faint, a whisper on the edge of his heightened senses. It wasn't chakra. It wasn't nature energy. It was something else entirely, something his Six Paths Sage mode had never encountered. It was a resonance. The cold, dead finality of the power within him was like a perfectly tuned tuning fork, struck and held in absolute silence. And from somewhere impossibly far away, across a distance that felt wider than oceans or continents, another tuning fork was beginning to vibrate in response. But this new vibration was different. Where his power was a silent, cold void, this was a gentle, warm hum. Where his was the concept of an unchangeable past, this felt like the possibility of a rewritten present. It was a feeling of profound, compassionate denial. It was a soft, warm light in the infinite cold darkness. It wasn't a threat. It felt like a question. Like a melody seeking its harmony. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his blue irises glowing faintly in the moonlight. The feeling was real. It was a pull, a faint but undeniable tug on the very essence of his new, cursed power. For the first time since that bone blade had grazed his skin, the suffocating loneliness lessened, replaced by a spark of bewildered, impossible hope. He was an island of absolute ending. But somewhere, across the veil of worlds, it seemed there was another. And it felt like a sanctuary. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Rejects the World. A week passed. A week of suffocating silence and self-imposed exile. Naruto's life had shrunk to the four walls of his apartment. His routine was a grim parody of normalcy. In the morning, a shadow clone would poof into existence, stretch, and head out the door to handle his public duties. It would greet villagers, sit in on tedious council meetings, offer a reassuring smile to the children at the academy, and even eat ramen at Ichiraku. All while the real Naruto sat by his window, watching the vibrant life of his village unfold like a movie he was no longer a part of. He trained, but it was a lonely, terrifying affair. He practiced his control, not of his power, but of his own body. He moved through katas with painstaking precision, his every motion deliberate, ensuring he never so much as brushed against a wall. The fear of leaving a permanent, black scar on his own home was a constant, nagging presence. He spent hours in meditation, trying to understand the cold, dead chakra now grafted to his soul. It didn't feel like Kurama's malevolent energy from his childhood, which was a raging, hateful inferno. This was different. It was the absolute, silent cold of a dead star. It had no emotion, no will of its own. It simply was, and its nature was to make other things share its state of finality. He learned to wall it off, to build a dam of his own life-filled chakra around it, but the dam was always under pressure. It was exhausting. The resonance he had felt, that faint, warm hum from across the void, had not returned. He began to wonder if it had been a hallucination, a desperate figment of his isolated mind. The hope it had sparked was beginning to curdle into just another disappointment. His friends tried. Sakura would leave meticulously prepared meals outside his door. Kakashi would appear on his windowsill. Not to talk about the curse, but to share some inane village gossip, a clear attempt to keep him connected. Sasuke had simply stood outside his building for an entire night, a silent, solitary watch. A wordless statement of solidarity that Naruto appreciated more than any platitude. But none of them could cross the threshold. None could offer the simple, grounding act of a physical presence. One afternoon, as Naruto was staring listlessly at the Hokage faces carved into the mountain, a tremor ran through the building. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a subtle, sickening lurch, as if the very fabric of space had been snagged on a cosmic thread. The air in his apartment grew thick, heavy with the same ozone and static stench from the Kagaya dimension. Kurama's voice boomed in his mind, instantly alert. Kit, that feeling, the world is tearing. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his sage senses flaring. Kurama was right. High in the sky, above the center of the village, the air was shimmering, distorting like a heat haze on a summer road. But this wasn't heat. This was reality fraying at the edges. He could feel it now, the source of the disturbance. It was the scar on his side. The cold, dead power within him was acting like a beacon, a point of absolute negativity in the world that was attracting something. The dimensional instability from the fight with the loyalists hadn't fully dissipated. It had merely been drawn to him, coalescing around his personal wound in the universe. I caused this, Naruto whispered, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. He watched as the shimmering air tore open. It wasn't a clean portal like Sasuke's. It was a jagged, violent rip, a black wound in the blue canvas of the sky. From this tear, something vast and horrifying began to emerge. It was bone white, its shape vaguely humanoid but monstrously large, dwarfing the Hokage Tower. A gaping, black hole was torn through its chest where a heart should be, and its face was a grotesque, grinning mask of bleached bone. A low, guttural shriek echoed across Konoha, a sound not of air vibrating, but of souls grinding together. It was a sound of pure, abject despair. Panic erupted on the streets below. People screamed, running for cover. The idyllic afternoon had shattered into a nightmare. A voice said, low and grim. Naruto turned. Sasuke was there, standing in his living room. His Rinnegan glowing. He hadn't used the door. You know what that is? Naruto demanded, his eyes fixed on the monstrosity. Legends from the Uchiha archives. Beings of pure, corrupted spiritual energy. Soul Eaters, Sasuke said, his gaze analytical. They aren't from our world. Your new power, it must have called it. It's drawn to powerful souls and existential anomalies. You're both. The Anbu were the first to respond, their porcelain masks emotionless as they flickered across rooftops, launching a volley of fire and lightning jutsu at the creature. The attacks flew true, striking the hollow's massive form. And then they passed right through it, harmlessly dissipating on the other side. The creature didn't even seem to notice. It's not corporeal, a voice shouted from the command channels that Naruto could now sense. The hollow raised a colossal arm. It swiped at a section of the village, its movements deceptively fast. Buildings were not so much smashed as they were erased, disintegrating into dust and motes of light on contact. The creature wasn't just destroying, it was consuming. Barrier team, now. Kakashi's voice, amplified by jutsu, boomed across the village. 4 pillars of light shot up at the corners of Konoha, a translucent dome of purple chakra shimmering into existence over the village, the 4 violet flame battle encampment. The Alo's next swipe connected with the barrier. The dome groaned, spiderweb cracks of raw energy spreading across its surface. It was holding, but barely. Naruto's hands clenched into fists. He had to get out there. But what could he do? His most powerful attacks, the Rasenshuriken, the tailed beast bombs, were all based on physical destruction and chakra. If the ANBU's jutsu had no effect, his might not either. The only weapon he had that might work was the one he was terrified to use. He could feel it, the cold power in his side, humming with a dark, hungry interest. It recognized the hollow. It wanted to touch it. He imagined reaching out, placing his hand on that thing, and inflicting a wound that could not be healed. The thought was tempting. It would be a definitive end to the threat. But what if he missed? What if his power lashed out and struck the barrier, making the damage permanent? What if it grazed a building, a tree, a person? He would be trading a monster for a plague. Naruto, stay put, Sasuke said. His gaze hard. You're the beacon. If you get closer, you might just make it stronger. Let us handle this. Before Naruto could argue, Sasuke vanished in a swirl of spatial distortion, reappearing in the sky near the creature. Chidori crackled to life in his hand, a piercing shriek of lightning. He shot forward, a black and purple comet, and plunged his hand into the hollow's mass. For a second, it looked like it worked. The lightning tore through the creature's spiritual body, causing it to convulse. But then, just as quickly, the damage sealed itself. The hole Sasuke had torn closed over, leaving no trace. The creature backhanded him, a casual, contemptuous swipe. Sasuke, with his incredible reflexes, managed to warp away a split second before impact, reappearing on a rooftop, breathing heavily. Its regeneration is instantaneous, he muttered, audible only to himself but felt by Naruto's senses. Physical damage is useless. The situation was escalating. The barrier was cracking. Flakes of purple energy raining down on the village. Jonin were coordinating attacks, but it was like throwing stones into a ghost. Genjutsu had no effect on a being that likely didn't have a conventional brain to fool. Taijutsu was pointless. Ninjutsu was a light show. They were fighting a concept, a specter of hunger given form. From his vantage point, Naruto saw everything. He saw Sakura directing medical teams, healing the injured from falling debris. He saw Shikamaru on the command roof next to Kakashi, his mind racing to find a weakness, a strategy against the impossible. He saw his home, his people, terrified and helpless against a threat he had brought to their doorstep. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing him. His isolation wasn't protecting them. It had made them vulnerable. The hollow let out another soul-rending shriek and slammed both its fists into the barrier. This time, the dome shattered. A rain of purple energy fell as the last line of defense broke. And the creature was now free to wreak havoc. Damn it, Naruto snarled. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't hide while his friends died. He made a decision. He would use his speed, his clones, his raw power to run interference, to draw its attention, to buy time. He wouldn't use that power unless he had no other choice. It was a risk, but it was better than doing nothing. He was about to burst out of his apartment when it happened. The jagged, ugly tear in the sky, the one the hollow had come through, suddenly pulsed. But this pulse wasn't black and violent. It was a soft, warm, orange-gold light, the color of a perfect sunrise. The light poured out, not with a roar, but with a gentle, chiming hum that seemed to push back against the hollow's oppressive aura of despair. A gateway of pure, benevolent light formed, perfectly circular and serene, hanging in the air a few hundred feet from the monstrous creature. Every shinobi in the village stopped. Their attacks ceased. Their shouting died down. All eyes, including the empty sockets of the hollow, turned to this new, impossible phenomenon. From the center of the gateway, a figure emerged. It was a girl. She had long, vibrant orange hair that seemed to catch the light, and her frame was slender, unassuming. She wore a simple white blouse and a gray skirt, a far cry from any combat gear the shinobi had ever seen. There was a gentle, almost timid air about her. She looked completely and utterly out of place. What now? Shikamaru breathed from the command center, his mind failing to compute this new variable. A civilian. The girl didn't seem afraid. She looked at the chaos below, the screaming people, the ruined buildings, the monstrous hollow, and her soft, gray eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. She floated in the air, her hands clasped in front of her. Naruto stared, mesmerized. He felt it. It was the resonance. The warm, gentle hum he had sensed in his lonely apartment, now amplified 1,000 times. It was her. She was the source. His cold, dead power recoiled slightly, not in fear, but like a shadow shrinking from a sudden light. The girl brought her hands up, spreading her fingers. 6 small, petal-like beings of light, like fairies made of golden energy, fluttered out from the hairpins she wore. They took up formation in front of her, forming a glowing, golden-orange shield. Soden Kishin, she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the silent battlefield. I reject. She extended her hands toward a collapsed apartment building, where several shinobi lay trapped and injured under the rubble. The shield of light enveloped the entire area, and then the world turned upside down. It wasn't healing. Naruto had seen Tsunade's creation rebirth, had seen the pinnacle of medical ninjutsu. This was something else entirely. The rubble didn't just lift, it flowed backward, pieces of concrete and steel knitting themselves back together. The dust settled back into solid forms. The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood played in reverse, a discordant symphony that resolved into a chord of wholeness. In a matter of seconds, the building stood tall and pristine, as if it had never been touched. The shinobi who had been crushed beneath it now stood on the street, their wounds, their torn clothes, their very memories of the pain, gone. They looked at their own bodies. At the perfectly restored building, their faces a mask of utter disbelief. What was that? Sakura whispered, her medical expertise rendered completely irrelevant. She hadn't seen healing. She had seen an event being denied. An event being unwritten from the pages of reality. From his apartment, Naruto's breath hitched. He understood. He understood on a fundamental, conceptual level that no one else could. His power took a moment of damage and made it absolute, eternal, and unchangeable. It declared, "This happened, and it can never be undone." Her power took a moment of damage and rejected its very existence. It declared, "This never happened." They were perfect, polar opposites. The absolute end and the absolute denial of that end. The girl, Orihime, as her name echoed in Naruto's soul, then turned her attention to the hollow. The creature, seemingly possessing some primal intelligence, recognized her as a threat. It roared and lunged, its massive, clawed hands swiping at her. "Santen Keshun," she said, her voice still calm. 3 of her 6 flower fairies zipped in front of her, forming a triangular shield. "I reject." The hollow's colossal hand, a force that had shattered Konoha's most powerful barrier, struck the small, golden triangle of light. There was no cataclysmic explosion. No earth-shattering impact. The hand simply stopped. The point of contact bedway. And the monster's spiritual evil in her shield of rejection fizzled into nothingness. The hollow's attack was negated, denied, rejected from existence at the point of impact. The creature recoiled, acting its hand as if it had touched something that had burned it with its sheer purity. Naruto felt a grin spread across his face, the first genuine smile in a week. It wasn't just hope, it was awe. Chi was the feeling of a man who thought he was the only one of his kind in the universe suddenly finding his counterpart. Orihime then pointed all 6 of her spirits at the hollow. "Shiden Koshin," she declared, her voice firm. A 4th spirit joined the shield, which shot forward and surrounded the hollow. The remaining 2 spirits flew to either side. "I reject." The hollow was enveloped in a cage of golden light. It thrashed and roared, but its struggles were useless. It wasn't being held by force. Its very being was being challenged. Naruto watched, his 6 paths senses seeing it with perfect clarity. The hollow wasn't being destroyed or sealed. It was unbecoming. Its form flickered, its bone-white mask cracking, not from force, but from a loss of cohesion. The despairing shriek it let out began to climb in pitch until it sounded like a tape being rewound at high speed. With a final, silent implosion of light, the hollow was gone. Not killed, not banished. Erased. The tear in the sky it had come from wavered, then sealed itself shut, leaving behind a perfectly normal, blue sky. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence fell over the village of Konoha. The shinobi on the rooftops, the civilians in the streets, the Hokage on his tower. Everyone stared at the orange-haired girl floating serenely in the sky, the small, petal-like spirits now returning to their places in her hair. The battle had lasted less than 10 minutes. The shinobi of Konoha, the most powerful military force in the world, had been utterly helpless. And this girl, this stranger from another world, had ended it. With a whisper and a gentle wave of her hand. Her work done, the energy holding her aloft seemed to fade. She began to fall. Before anyone else could react, a blur of yellow shot from a nearby apartment building. Naruto, moving faster than almost anyone could track, appeared in the air beneath her, catching her gently. For a terrifying, split second, his mind screamed at him. "Don't touch her, you'll hurt her, you'll give her a scar that will never heal." But he couldn't let her fall. He braced himself for the horrifying sensation of his power lashing out, of her skin being burned by his very touch. He caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist and under her knees. She was light, and nothing happened. There was no rejection, no corrosion, no flash of black, dead chakra. He felt warmth, her skin against the fabric of his clothes. And he felt the resonance, no longer a faint hum, but a powerful, soothing chord. His cold, destructive power, for the first time, was utterly silent. It was dormant, pacified by her presence. It was like her very being was a sanctuary from his curse. He landed softly on the roof of the Hokage Tower, where Kakashi, Shikamaru, and a stunned Sasuke were already gathering. He held her for a moment longer than necessary, his mind reeling from the simple, profound relief of physical contact without consequence. Orihime's eyes fluttered open. They were a soft, intelligent gray, and they looked up at him with a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity. Their eyes met. Across the silent battlefield, in the heart of the village he had inadvertently endangered and she had single-handedly saved, the unhealing sun met the shield of 6 flowers. The man cursed with absolute finality and the woman blessed with absolute denial. In that one, shared glance, a silent understanding passed between them. They were anomalies. They were opposites. And in a world that could not understand either of them, they had just found the only person who possibly could. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A Sanctuary of Opposites. The interrogation room, or as Kakashi preferred to call it, the guest debriefing chamber, was a sterile, windowless box deep within the Hokage Tower. It was designed to be intimidating, to strip away pretense and get to the truth. But the girl with the sunset-colored hair seemed entirely unfazed. She sat politely at the metal table, sipping a cup of tea Sakura had brought her. Her expression one of mild curiosity rather than fear. Orihime Inoue was now the single greatest puzzle in Konoha. She had appeared from a tear in the sky, wielded a power that defied every known law of ninjutsu, and single-handedly neutralized a threat that had stymied the village's strongest. Now, she was stranded. The gateway she had come through was gone, and she had no idea how to reopen it. Across the table from her sat Kakashi, Shikamaru, and Naruto. Sasuke leaned against the far wall, a silent specter observing the proceedings with his single, sharp eye. Tsunade and Sakura observed from behind a one-way mirror, their medical minds still reeling from what they had witnessed. So, let me see if I have this right, Shikamaru said, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. He had been questioning her for the better part of an hour, his usual lazy drawl replaced with a focused intensity. You're from a place called Karakura Town. It's in a country called Japan. And your power, Soden Kishin, isn't a jutsu. You call it a heart-driven phenomenon. Orihime nodded, taking another delicate sip of her tea. That's right. My powers are connected to my spirit, my will. The Shun Shun Rika are the manifestation of that will. She gestured to the flower-shaped hairpins nestled in her hair. Tsubaki, the lone male spirit responsible for her offensive shield, seemed to peek out for a moment before hiding again. And it rejects events, Shikamaru continued, massaging his temples. The concept was giving him a headache. You don't heal a wound. You reject the event of the person being wounded in the first place. You don't block an attack, you reject its existence upon impact. Yes, Orihime said with a simple, guileless smile. It's like turning back the clock, but only for the things that have gone wrong. Kakashi, who had been listening with his chin resting on his hand, finally spoke. Inoue-san, your abilities are extraordinary. You saved our village, and we are deeply grateful. But you must understand our position. We've never encountered anything like you or the creature you fought. I understand, she said softly. I'm in your world, uninvited. You have every right to be cautious. There was no defensiveness in her tone, only a quiet empathy for their predicament. It was disarming. Naruto had been mostly silent, content to observe. He was still processing the sensation of holding her. For the first time in a week, the constant, low-level thrum of anxiety that had settled deep in his bones was gone. Her proximity was like a balm. The cold, dead chakra of his curse was still there, a black scar on his soul, but it was quiet, dormant. It was as if her very presence created a zone of neutrality where his power had no purchase. He wasn't just grateful for her saving the village, he was grateful for the silence she brought to the war inside him. He felt the need to speak, to bridge the gap between their worlds. That monster, he began, his voice drawing all eyes to him. The hollow. I think I'm the reason it came here. Shikamaru's gaze sharpened. What do you mean, Naruto? Naruto took a breath, the confession heavy on his tongue. He couldn't tell them the full truth of his curse, not yet. But he could give them a piece of it. The mission a week ago, against the Kagaya loyalists. The injure. Why I sustained. It left behind a strange chakra signature. Something that doesn't belong in our world. It seems to have acted as a beacon, destabilizing the space around me and attracting the thing. It was a carefully edited version of the truth, but it was enough. It explained the anomaly without revealing the terrifying nature of his new ability. Orihime's gaze fell upon him, and her gray eyes were filled not with accusation, but with a deep, knowing sympathy. It was a look that said, "You're an anomaly, too, aren't you?" He felt a powerful, unspoken connection in that gaze. Kakashi nodded slowly. That would explain the suddenness of the dimensional tear. A lingering effect from Kagaya's space-time jutsu, catalyzed by a foreign energy. He looked between Naruto and Orihime. Which mean, you two are now intrinsically linked to this problem. The debriefing concluded with a simple decision. Orihime would be a guest of Konoha, afforded all the protections and courtesies of an honored ally. She was assigned a village apartment. Coincidentally, one just down the hall from Naruto's, and Sakura was tasked with helping her acclimate. In truth, it was a gentle form of quarantine. They needed to keep her close, to study her, and to protect her. Later that day, Naruto stood in his own apartment, the familiar feeling of a cage settling around him again. But this time, it was different. He could feel her presence through the wall. It wasn't a sensory perception in the ninja sense, it was a conceptual one. A warm, gentle hum on the edge of his awareness, a constant counterpoint to the cold void in his side. A knock came at his door. He stiffened. No one knocked. They left things outside or spoke to him from a distance. Naruto-san, a soft voice called. It was her. Sakura-san showed me to my room. She said you were my neighbor. I just wanted to say thank you again for catching me. Naruto walked to the door, his hand hovering over the handle. He couldn't open it. He couldn't risk it. You don't have to thank me, he said through the wood. You saved everyone. I didn't do anything. There was a pause. You did, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You were he first person who wasn't afraid to touch me. His breath caught in his throat. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood of the door. Funny, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. I was terrified. Why? She asked simply. He couldn't answer. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of their opposing powers resonating through the door. Can I try something? Orihime asked, her voice still soft. Sakura-san told me you were injured last week, and that the wound is giving you trouble. She said she couldn't heal it. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs. The one person whose power was the conceptual opposite of his curse wanted to try and fix it. What would happen? Would they cancel each other out in a cataclysmic explosion? Or would one overwhelm the other? It's not a good idea, he said, his voice strained. When Sakura tried, her own healing chakra was damaged. My power is different, Orihime insisted gently. It doesn't add anything. It only takes away the damage. Please, let me try. I feel like I'm supposed to. He was supposed to say no. It was the logical, safe choice. But the desperate hope that had been born in the darkness of his isolation was now a roaring flame. The possibility of being free, of being able to touch his friends again, was too powerful to ignore. He made a decision. All right, he said, his voice raspy. But not here. Meet me on the training grounds. Number 7. In 10 minutes. And come alone. He didn't wait for a reply, using his body flicker technique to vanish from his appa. RT meant and reappear in the deserted training ground, the cool night air a shock to his system. Training Ground 7 was a place of powerful memories. It was where Team 7 had first been formed, where they had fought Kakashi for the bells. Where their journey had truly begun. The 3 wooden posts stood as silent witnesses to the passage of time. Naruto stood in the center of the clearing, waiting. He had pulled up his jacket, exposing the stark, black scar on his side. In the moonlight, it seemed to drink the light, a patch of absolute nothingness on his skin. Orihime arrived moments later, a silent figure emerging from the trees. She looked at the scar, and her breath hitched. Her eyes, which had been so full of compassion before, now held a flicker of something else, a professional focus, a healer's solemnity. It's worse than I thought, she whispered. It feels empty, like a hole in the world. That's one way to put it, Naruto said grimly. Tsunade Bachan called it a state of absolute, unchanging stasis. Sakura tried to heal it, and it burned her. Be careful, Orihime nodded, her expression serious. She stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. I will be. She took a deep breath. And her 6 spirits fluttered from her hairpins, glowing in the moonlight. Ayame, Bagan, Hanagaku, Lily, Shuna, Tsubaki. They took their position, forming the familiar golden-orange shield. Soden Kishin, she chanted. Her voice a soft melody in the quiet night. She extended her hands, and the shield of light moved forward, enveloping Naruto's side. Naruto braced himself. He expected a jolt, an explosion, a rejection. He expected pain. He felt nothing. The light of Soden Kishin washed over the scar. It didn't recoil. It didn't sizzle. It didn't even part around the wound as Tsunade's had. It simply met the black, dead chakra of the scar, and both of them stopped. It was the most bizarre sensation Naruto had ever experienced. It was like two immovable objects meeting. The irresistible force of Orihime's rejection of events met the absolute, unchangeable state of his permanent wound. And they cancelled each other out into perfect, absolute neutrality. The golden light of her shield flickered where it made contact with the scar. The blackness of the scar seemed to shimmer, as if resisting a force it could not overwhelm but refused to yield to. For a moment, neither power gained ground. It was a stalemate on a conceptual level, a war being waged in the space between moments. Orihime's brow was furrowed in concentration. She was pouring more of her will into the phenomenon, trying to push past the resistance. It's stubborn, she grunted, a line of sweat beading on her temple. It's not just a wound. It's like a statement. It's like the universe itself is screaming that this damage is meant to be there. Naruto could feel it too. The cold power in his side was no longer dormant. It was awake, pushing back against her benevolent light, defending its own existence. It wasn't malicious. It was just fulfilling its nature. Its nature was to be an end, and her power was trying to unwrite that end. He saw the strain on her face. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't let her fight this alone. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. He didn't try to fight his curse. Instead, he did something he hadn't tried before. He accepted it. He let his own chakra, his life force, flow up to the boundary of the scar, not to fight it, but to surround it, to contain it, to tell it, you are a part of me now. But I am in control. It was a subtle shift, but Orihime felt it instantly. The stubborn, absolute resistance from the scar wavered for a fraction of a second. It was no longer fighting against an external force, but against the will of its own host. In that fleeting moment of weakness, Orihime's power found a foothold. With a final, desperate push of her will, she cried out, I reject. The light of Soden Kishin flared, and for a single, blinding instant, it overwhelmed the scar. The blackness seemed to dissolve, not healing, but being unwritten. The skin beneath it began to reform, knitting itself back together in reverse. But the victory was incomplete. The scar's power, in its final moment of defiance, lashed out. It didn't attack her. It latched onto the very process of her rejection. The golden light sputtered and died. Orihime gasped, stumbling back, her face pale with exhaustion. Her 6 spirits fluttered weakly back to her hairpins, their light dim. Naruto looked down at his side. The scar was gone. The ugly, black line hat had been a source of so much fear and isolation had vanished. In its place was smooth, unblemished skin, as if he had never been injured at all. He was free. A jubilant, incredulous laugh bubbled up from his chest. You did it, Orihime. You actually did it. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, ready to clasp her shoulder in a gesture of triumphant gratitude. Wait, she whispered, her voice weak. She was staring at his side, her eyes wide with something that looked like horror. Naruto's smile faded. He looked down again. The scar was gone, yes. But something was wrong. Her Soden Kishin was a perfect restoration. It returned things to their previous, undamaged state. But his skin, it wasn't quite right. It was too smooth, too perfect. It lacked the tiny, almost invisible imperfections of normal skin. It looked like a doll's skin. And then he felt it. The cold, dead stillness hadn't vanished. It had spread. The 3-inch line was gone, but now a hand-sized patch of high skin where the scar had been felt, null. The curse wasn't gone. She hadn't erased it. She had just forced it to change its shape. In lashing out, the scar's power had corrupted her rejection, fusing with it. It had rejected the event of the scar, but had enforced a new, more subtle state of otherness on the area. He was still cursed. The prison had just gotten bigger. The weight of the realization crashed down on him. The brief, soaring hope plummeted, leaving a void of despair even deeper than before. He had gotten her hopes up. He had gotten his own hopes up. And for nothing. He looked at Orihime. She was pale, swaying on her feet, her spiritual energy almost completely depleted from the effort. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I failed. I made it worse." Seeing her distress, something inside Naruto shifted. His own crushing disappointment was momentarily forgotten, replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. She had poured her heart and soul into trying to help him. Had exhausted herself to the point of collapse for his sake. And now she was blaming herself. He couldn't allow that. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides. He didn't stop to think. He didn't hesitate. He reached out and gently took her hand. Her skin was cool and soft. His was warm. And again, nothing happened. No flash of black energy. No pain. Just the simple, grounding feeling of human contact. Her breath hitched in surprise, and she looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes wide. "You didn't fail," he said, his voice low and steady, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Look, you're touching me." Sakura couldn't even get close. "My own sensei couldn't, but you can." He squeezed her hand gently. "This thing," he said, gesturing to his side with his free hand. "It's a part of me now. Maybe it can't be healed. Maybe it can't be rejected. But being near you, it makes it quiet. You're the only person in the world who can stand this close to me without getting hurt. You didn't fail, Orihime. You just created a sanctuary." Her tears began to fall freely then, but they weren't tears of failure anymore. They were tears of relief, of a shared burden, of a connection that ran deeper than words. She leaned her forehead against his chest, her shoulders shaking with exhaustion and emotion. He rested his chin on the top of her vibrant orange hair. His other arm coming up to rest gently on her back. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was holding someone. He was offering comfort instead of being a source of fear. This shared limitation, this failure that had forged an undeniable, tangible bond between them, was more precious than any cure. But even in this moment of quiet connection, they were not truly alone. High, on a branch in the canopy of trees overlooking the training ground, a figure stood, cloaked in shadow and silence. It was not human. It was an entity of pure void, a scout sent from a place beyond dimensions. It had no face, no features, only an unnerving stillness. It had observed the battle with the Hollow. It had observed the meeting of the two powers. It watched the boy who carried a stolen shish, art of its master's authority over finality, and the girl who possessed the heretical power to unwrite reality. It watched as they found solace in one another, their opposing natures creating a stable, blasphemous paradox. The scout did not need to think. It only needed to observe and report. Its purpose was singular, and the report it would deliver to its master, the sovereign of annihilation, would be simple. The anomalies have found each other. The heresy has taken root. Intervention is required. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The weight of a final touch. The tentative peace forged in the Moonlig. HT of Training Ground 7 was a fragile thing. In the days that followed, an odd but comfortable domesticity settled between Naruto and Orihime. Her presence was a constant, soothing anchor. The oppressive fear that had haunted his every move receded, replaced by a cautious normalcy. He could walk around his own apartment without the paralyzing fear of brushing against a wall. He could hand her a cup of tea without envisioning the ceramic cracking into unfixable pieces. With her near, the curse was quiescent, a sleeping beast. Their bond was no longer just about their opposing powers, it was built in the small, quiet moments. He introduced her to the glorious, life-affirming wonder of Ichiraku's ramen, watching with amusement as she meticulously tried to reject the spiciness of the chili oil. A feat that ended with her fanning her mouth and him laughing until his sides ached. She, in turn, tried to teach him about her world, about things like television and cell phones, concepts had made his head spin more than any high-level ceiling formula. They were a strange pair, the hero of the world and the girl from another, finding a shared home in their mutual strangeness. Naruto's friends saw the change in him. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, mature confidence. He still kept his distance from them, a habit now ingrained, but the crushing loneliness had lifted. They saw him smile again. A real smile, and for that, they were grateful to the strange, gentle girl with the sunset hair. But the world outside their small sanctuary did not stand still. The past had a nasty habit of refusing to stay buried. The first reports came from the border of the Land of Sound, a region still rife with instability and dark legacies. A small Konoha outpost had gone silent. Then a second. The initial assumption was rogue shinobi or bandits. A standard investigative team was dispatched. They never reported back. It was Sasuke who brought the news, appearing in Naruto's apartment in a swirl of his Rinnegan portal, his expression more grim than usual. Orihime, who had been arranging a small, cheerful pot of flowers on the windowsill, looked up in alarm. "We have a problem," Sasuke said without preamble, his gaze flickering between Naruto and Orihime. "The team we sent to the Sound border. They were found, or what was left of them." Naruto's newfound calm evaporated. "What happened?" "They were butchered," Sasuke stated flatly, his voice devoid of emotion, a clinical report of a horrific event. "But the bodies, they were strange. They were covered in wounds. But the wounds were all regenerating, closing up even in death. And there were signs of experimentation. Wires, tubes, patches of wood growing directly from their flesh." Naruto's blood ran cold. He knew that signature. Orochimaru. He breathed, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Not Orochimaru himself," Sasuke corrected. "He's under constant surveillance by Yamato. This feels like one of his abandoned projects. Something he left behind that has matured." Kakashi had already escalated the threat level. He, along with a team of Konoha's best, including Sai and a squad of Anbu, went to investigate personally. Naruto was ordered to remain in the village. Publicly, it was because his presence was needed to maintain stability. The truth, which Naruto understood without it being said, was that they didn't want his curse anywhere near an unknown, high-level threat. He was too valuable, and too dangerous, to risk. He hated it. He paced his apartment like a caged tiger, the sense of helplessness a familiar bitter pill. Orihime watched him, her hands clasped, her face a portrait of quiet worry. The news from Kakashi's team came 2 days later, and it was dire. They had located the source, a moving fortress. A grotesque amalgamation of flesh, wood, and metal, crawling across the blasted landscape of the Land of Sound like a monstrous insect. And at its heart was a single man. The intel, relayed by one of Sai's ink birds, was terrifying. The man, a former test subject of Orochimaru's, had not only survived his experiments but had integrated them. He possessed a healing factor so advanced it bordered on absolute. He could regenerate from near-total disintegration in seconds, a side effect of a crude but potent infusion of Hashirama Senju's cells. He could absorb chakra, reshape his own body, and wield a twisted version of wood release. He was a one-man army, and he was heading directly for the nearest major population center, a city on the border of the Land of Fire. His goal was simple: to gather more hearts for his ever-evolving body. Kakashi's team had engaged. They had failed. Kakashi himself was now injured, a piece of shrapnel embedded in his shoulder that was actively resisting medical ninjutsu due to the enemy's corrosive chakra. The Anbu had sustained heavy casualties. The enemy was, for all intents and purposes, unstoppable by conventional means. "He regenerates from everything," Sasuke relayed, having just returned from a quick reconnaissance trip to the front line. He stood in the Hokage's office, a grim council of war having been convened. Tsunade, Shikamaru, Naruto, and Orihime were present. Amaterasu burns him, but he just sheds the burning flesh and grows new tissue. I tried cutting off his limbs, they grow back. We're fighting a tide, and we're losing. Tsunade slammed her fist on the table. Hashirama's cells, that snake. The regenerative power, if perfected, is nearly limitless. It's what made Madara so difficult to put down. Shikamaru's brow was furrowed, his fingers steepled in front of his face. This is a strategic nightmare. We can't exhaust him. We can't out-damage his healing. Sealing is our best option, but he's too mobile. And his wood release can counter most large-scale sealing arrays. It's a stalemate, and he's the one advancing. What a drag. All eyes in the room slowly, inevitably, turned to Naruto. He felt their gazes like a physical weight. Everyone was thinking it. The terrible, unspoken solution. They were facing an enemy with absolute regeneration. And in this room stood a man with the power of absolute finality. Naruto's stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. He looked at his hands. He imagined touching that monster. He imagined the black, crackling energy of his curse flowing from him, not as a mistake or an accident, but as a weapon. He imagined the creature's healing factor sputtering and dying, its wounds becoming permanent, its body a prison of unending, unfixable agony. The thought was horrifying. It felt like a sin. His power was a curse, a plague to be contained. To use it intentionally, to inflict that state of absolute, unchanging damage on another living being. No, he said, his voice quiet but firm. There has to be another way. Is there? Tsunade challenged, her expression hard. Naruto, we are talking about thousands of civilian lives. Kakashi is injured. Our forces are being depleted. We are running out of options. Your personal feelings about this ability of yours are a luxury we may not be able to afford. It's not about my feelings. Naruto shot back, his voice rising. It's about what that power is. To use it like that, it's not a jutsu. It's not defeating an enemy. It's damning them. I would be inflicting a state of living death. It's a line I don't know if I can cross. Orihime, who had been silent, placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her touch was a cool anchor in the rising storm of his emotions. He looked at her, and she gave him a small, reassuring nod. Her eyes didn't hold judgment, only support. She wasn't telling him what to do, only that she would be with him, no matter his choice. Let me try first, Sasuke said suddenly. The two of us, together, my Susanoo combined with your Recentrican. Overwhelming power. We'll vaporize him so completely there's nothing left to regenerate. We've done it before. Naruto latched onto the idea. A reprieve from the terrible choice he was facing. Yes, that's it. We'll hit him with everything we have. We won't give him a chance to heal. Shikamaru sighed. It's a long shot. The intel says he can regenerate from a single cell. But it's the best plan we have that doesn't involve the alternative. Go. We'll coordinate support. The battlefield was a scene of devastation. The ground was churned into a muddy wasteland, pocked with craters and littered with the debris of shattered wood release jutsu. In the center of it all was the enemy. He was a tall, gaunt man, his skin a patchwork of pale flesh. Dark wood, and gleaming metal. Wires snaked in and out of his arms, and his eyes glowed with a feverish, insane light. He was laughing, a high, unhinged sound, as he effortlessly impaled two Anbu with sharp wooden spears that erupted from the ground. More parts, he shrieked, his head twitching at an unnatural angle. The master's work must be completed. We must become perfect, immortal. Then, the sky darkened. A colossal, armored warrior of purple chakra materialized around Sasuke, the perfect Susanoo. In the next instant, a golden blur of energy appeared beside it, Naruto. Blazing in his six paths sage mode, a massive Recentrican, shrieking like 1,000 buzzsaws, spinning in his hand. Now, Naruto, Sasuke yelled from within his avatar. The Susanoo drew its massive katana. Naruto poured all the power he could muster into his attack. They struck as one. The Recentrican merged with the Susanoo's blade, creating a weapon of unimaginable destructive power. The blade came down, a screaming vortex of wind and chakra, aimed directly at the crazed experiment. The impact was cataclysmic. The ground for a mile in every direction was vaporized. A mushroom cloud of dust and energy rose into the sky. The sound was a deafening roar that shook the very mountains. It was an attack that could have leveled a hidden village. It was total annihilation. Naruto and Sasuke stood on a newly formed cliff edge, breathing heavily, staring into the massive, smoking crater they had created. Did we get him? Naruto asked, his senses straining to find any trace of the man's chakra. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a flicker. In the center of the crater, a single, pulsating piece of flesh, no bigger than a fist, lay on the scorched earth. As they watched in horror, it began to bubble and expand. Wooden tendrils shot out from it, anchoring it to the ground, drawing nutrients and energy from the earth itself. Flesh, bone, and muscle began to grow at an impossible rate. In less than 30 seconds, the man stood before them again, completely reformed. He was naked and steaming, but he was whole. He even had the audacity to yawn. "That was a good try," he said, his voice calm now. The insanity replaced by a cold, analytical curiosity. A powerful attack. But you see, the master's gift is absolute. As long as one cell remains, I am eternal. He tilted his head. But that energy, Uzumaki Naruto. The master spoke of you. You have a great deal of life force. You would make a fine addition to my collection. He lunged. The battle that followed was not a contest of power, but a desperate, grinding war of attrition. Sasuke's Amaterasu burned the man, only for him to shed the flames like a snake shedding its skin. Naruto's tailed beast bombs blasted him to pieces, only for him to reform moments later. They were fighting an unkillable monster. And they were tiring. Naruto's reserves were vast, but not infinite. Sasuke's use of his Rinnegan and Susanoo was taking its toll. The man, however, seemed to draw energy from the very earth, his stamina limitless. He was toying with them now, adapting his strategies, using their own fatigue against them. He separated them with a sudden wall of wood, then sent a volley of hardened wooden projectiles at Sasuke. Sasuke, his vision blurring slightly from chakra exhaustion, managed to block most of them with a ribcage of his Susanoo, but one slipped through his defense. It was a small, sharp spear of wood, and it went straight through Sasuke's side, impaling him and pinning him to the ground. "Sasuke!" Naruto roared, smashing through the wood wall. Sasuke grunted in pain, blood staining his dark cloak. He tried to pull the spear out, but wooden tendrils grew from it, wrapping around his ribs, digging deeper. "Don't worry, Uchiha," the experiment cackled, walking slowly toward him. "You won't die. I'll keep you alive. Your eyes, they will be a magnificent addition." Sakura, who had arrived with a medical support team and had been kept at a safe distance, saw Sasuke go down. Ignoring all orders, she shot forward, her fists glowing with green chakra. "Get away from him." She was fast, but the man was faster. He simply raised a hand, and a thick shield of wood erupted from the ground, blocking her punch. The force of her blow shattered the shield, but the man was already behind her. He chopped the back of her neck with the edge of his hand, and she crumpled to the ground, unconscious. He didn't even consider her a threat. Naruto saw it all. He saw Sasuke, his best friend, his brother, pinned and bleeding. He saw Sakura, the woman who had been by his side since they were children, lying motionless on the ground. And he saw the monster, the unkillable abomination, reaching for them. In that moment, something inside Naruto broke. The careful walls he had built, the moral lines he had drawn, the fear of his own power, it all shattered into a million pieces. All that was left was a single, cold, crystalline purpose: protect his family. His golden chakra cloak vanished. The sage pigmentation around his eyes faded. He stood there in his simple black and orange jacket, looking utterly normal. But the air around him grew heavy, cold, and still. The experiment turned, sensing the shift. Giving up. A wise choice. Naruto didn't answer. He just started walking forward, his steps slow and deliberate. The man smirked and sent a dozen wood spears shooting toward him. Naruto didn't dodge. He didn't block. He simply raised his hand. As the spears came within inches of him, a wave of black, invisible energy rolled off him. The spears didn't shatter or stop. They just died. The vibrant, chakra-filled wood turned brittle and gray, crumbling into dust before they could touch him. The experiment's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. What? Naruto kept walking. He was a force of nature now, a walking embodiment of entropy. The ground beneath his feet seemed to lose its color, the very air around him growing sterile. He reached the monster. The man, for the first time, felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced since Orochimaru's operating table: fear. He thrust his hand forward, his arm morphing into a massive, sharp blade of wood and steel. Naruto didn't even flinch. He moved with a speed that was not the flash of a body flicker, but the simple, undeniable certainty of a predator closing in on its prey. He sidestepped the clumsy attack, flowing inside the man's guard, and he placed his open palm flat against the man's chest. There was no explosion, no roar of power. There was only a touch. A network of black, crackling lines, like veins of pure void, spread out from Naruto's hand, instantly covering the man's entire body. The man's eyes went wide. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He tried to activate his regeneration. He felt the power of Hashirama's cells, the wellspring of life within him, surging to heal the point of contact. And it failed. It didn't just fail, it was negated. The very concept of healing was being rejected, corroded, erased from his being. The life-giving cells screamed in silent agony as their purpose was rendered null and void. The wounds Sasuke and Naruto had inflicted on him hours ago, wounds that had healed in seconds, suddenly reappeared all at once. The burns from Amaterasu, the deep cuts from Susanoo's blade, the explosive trauma from the Rasenshuriken, all of it returned, but this time, it was permanent. He was a mosaic of unhealing wounds. He fell to his knees, his body a roadmap of his own failed immortality. He was not dead, he was not even dying. He was simply, perfectly, and eternally broken. Naruto pulled his hand back. The black lines faded, but the effect remained. The man stared at his own hands, at the cuts that refused to close, the burns that refused to fade. A low, wretched sound, half sob, half scream, tore from his throat. Naruto had won. He had saved his friends. He had stopped the monster. And he felt utterly, completely sick. He turned away from the broken creature, his gaze falling on Sasuke, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and awe. Naruto walked over, knelt, and placed his hands on the wooden spear impaling his friend. He didn't try to break it. He just touched it. The black energy flowed, and the wood died, crumbling into harmless dust, freeing Sasuke. He then walked to Sakura's side. He hesitated for a long moment, his hand trembling. He couldn't heal her, but he could check on her. He gently, carefully, rested 2 fingers on her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was strong and steady. She was only unconscious. Relief, so sharp and powerful it almost brought him to his knees, washed over him. He had won, but the victory felt like a profound sin. He had used the curse as a weapon. He had inflicted his own private hell on another being. He looked at his hand, the one that had delivered the final touch, and saw it as something alien, something monstrous. He stumbled away from his friends, away from the broken man, and collapsed behind a rocky outcrop, his body shaking. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a hollow, nauseating self-loathing. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to contain the terrible power that was now awake and buzzing under his skin. He didn't know how long he sat there, lost in his own horror. But eventually, a gentle presence made itself known. Orihime knelt in front of him. She didn't say anything. She didn't offer platitudes or try to tell him it was okay. She had seen everything from the support lines, had felt the shift in his power from a mile away. She just reached out and placed her hand over his, the one that was still trembling. Her touch was cool, calm, and utterly without judgment. He looked up at her, his eyes wild with a pain that had nothing to do with physical wounds. "I did it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I used it. I became the monster to stop the monster. You saved them," she whispered back, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable certainty. She squeezed his hand. "You saved the people you love. That's not a monster. That's a man." Her words, so simple and so true, cut through the fog of his self-hatred. He looked past her, at Sasuke now being tended to by a revived Sakura, at the threat that was now neutralized, at the lives that would not be lost. He had made a terrible choice. He had crossed a line. But he had done it for them. The weight of his power was still there. It would always be there. But as he looked into Orihime's compassionate, understanding eyes, he realized something. It was a burden he no longer had to carry alone. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The King's Silent Blade. The aftermath of the battle was a somber, quiet affair. The unkillable man, now eternally broken, was sealed within a specialized scroll and taken back to Konoha's most secure facility for study. The official report, heavily redacted by Shikamaru's careful hand, would speak of a new, highly classified sealing jutsu developed by Naruto. Only the handful of people who had been there, Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi, knew the terrifying truth. They looked at Naruto with a new, complex mixture of awe and apprehension. He had saved them, but he had unleashed something that defied the very principles of their world to do so. The victory did not bring Naruto peace. It brought him nightmares. He would see the look in the experiment's eyes as its immortality was stripped away, the dawning horror of a being trapped in a state of perfect, unending decay. He had weaponized his curse, and the act felt like a stain on his soul. Orihime was his anchor in this storm. She never left his side. Her quiet, constant presence was a silent rebuttal to the voice in his head that called him a monster. She didn't try to rationalize what he had done or tell him it was right. She simply accepted it as a part of the hard, terrible choices a protector must sometimes make. Her acceptance was a greater comfort than any absolution. Their bond, forged in the crucible of their opposing powers and deepened by shared trauma, was becoming the central pillar of his life. He showed her how to mold chakra, a basic exercise for any academy student, but a fascinating new experience for her. She was clumsy at it, her spiritual energy, her ryutsu, as she called it, resisting the structured flow of chakra. But as she struggled, laughing at her own failed attempts to make a leaf stick to her forehead, he felt a measure of peace. In these small moments of teaching and laughter, he was not the Jinchuriki. Not the hero, not the cursed one. He was just Naruto, sharing a quiet afternoon with the person who understood him best. But their sanctuary was built on borrowed time. The universe had taken notice. The scout, the silent entity of void that had observed them, had delivered its report. Its master, a being far older and more fundamental than any Kagaya or Hollow, now had a clear picture of the heresy taking root in this small, vibrant world. Kokuo, the sovereign of annihilation, a primordial force whose entire existence was dedicated to preserving the sanctity and inevitability of the end, saw Naruto and Orihime not as people, but as a cancer upon the laws of reality. Naruto's power was a stolen, perverted fragment of Kokuo's own authority over finally. Tai, a cancerous splinter that created endings where none were meant to be. Orihime's power was even worse. It was a blasphemous rewriting of causality, a denial of the past that threatened to unravel the entire tapestry of existence. Their union, a paradox of absolute ending and absolute denial finding harmony, was an intolerable affront. Kokuo did not rage. A concept does not feel anger. It feels imbalance, and its sole purpose is to restore that balance. It decided a scalpel was needed before a hammer. It would not send an army. It would send a message. An assassin. The attack came on a perfectly ordinary evening. Naruto and Orihime were walking through the bustling streets of Konoha's market district. The air was filled with the smell of grilled squid and the cheerful chatter of villagers. For a moment, life felt completely, blessedly normal. Naruto was even wearing a ridiculous, brightly colored festival mask he'd bought from a street vendor, a playful attempt to make Orihime laugh. Then, the world went silent. The chatter, the music, the sizzling of food, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The vibrant colors of the market stalls seemed to desaturate, turning a muted gray. A chill, devoid of temperature, crept into the air. The villagers around them continued to move, to talk, but it was like watching a movie with the sound turned off. They were there, but they weren't. Naruto and Orihime had been separated, sliced away from the normal flow of the world. Naruto-kun, Orihime asked, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. She instinctively moved closer to him. Naruto's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, battle-hardened focus. He dropped the mask. "Stay close," he ordered, his six paths sage mode flaring to life in an instant. His senses spread out, trying to find the source of this profound wrongness. He felt no chakra, no ryutsu, no nature energy. He felt only an encroaching, nothing. An interesting power, a voice said. It didn't come from any direction. It simply was, existing in the space between their thoughts, a calm, dispassionate whisper. You feel the world through its life. But I am the absence of life. How can you sense what is not there? Naruto spun around, trying to locate the speaker. There was no one. The street was empty, save for the ghost-like figures of the villagers. Then he saw it, in the polished surface of a shop window. A reflection was staring back at him. It was his own reflection, but it was wrong. The reflection's eyes were not blue, they were empty, black pits. And it was smiling, a cold, detached smile that did not match his own grim expression. As he watched, the reflection's hand, the one not holding Orihime's, lifted. It waved. Who are you? Naruto demanded, his voice a low growl. I am the echo. The voice whispered in his mind. I am the memory of a sound after it has faded. I am the image left on the retina after the light is gone. I am the lingering ghost of a concluded event. My master has sent me to correct a discrepancy. Orihime gasped. She was looking at her own reflection in a puddle of water on the ground. It was also smiling that same cold, empty smile. The reflections in every polished surface, the windows, the puddles, the blade of a kunai on a nearby weapon stand, even the pupils of their own eyes, all began to shift. They were all the echo. It was everywhere and nowhere. Your existence is a paradox, the echo continued, its voice calm and philosophical, the tone of a lecturer explaining a fundamental truth. The end is not a punishment. It is a kindness. It is the period at the end of a sentence, giving it meaning. Without it, there is only an endless, meaningless scrawl. You, it said, its gaze seeming to focus on Naruto's soul, you wield a shard of my master's authority. But you use it to create grotesque, unnatural full stops in the middle of a word. You are a typo in the scripture of reality. The reflection in the shop window stepped forward, pushing against the glass as if it were a thin film of water. And you, the voice addressed Orihime, her reflection in the puddle rippling, you are a far greater heresy. You take the finished, printed page and try to erase the words, believing your childish scrawl to be superior. You deny the past, which is the only thing that gives the present meaning. The echo's reflection of Naruto began to step out of the window. It wasn't breaking the glass. It was emerging from the two-dimensional plane of the reflection into the three-dimensional world, a perfect, monochrome duplicate of Naruto, its eyes empty voids. My master, Kokuo, the sovereign of annihilation, has decreed that your blasphemous union must end, the echo said, its duplicate now standing fully on the street. Your powers, when separate, are a nuisance. Together, they are a potential unraveling of causality. You must be erased. The echo Naruto lunged, moving with a speed that perfectly matched Naruto's own. It didn't pull a kunai or form a Rasengan. It simply reached out, its hand aimed for Naruto's chest. Naruto reacted on pure instinct. He met the attack, his own hand catching the duplicate's wrist. The moment they made contact, a shockwave of pure conceptual energy erupted. Naruto felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, as if his own past was flickering. He saw flashes of his lonely childhood, of his fight with Gaara, of Jiraiya's death. All threatening to change. The echo wasn't attacking his body, it was attacking his history. At the same time, the echo Orihime was rising from the puddle, a watery, gray duplicate of Orihime. Her eyes just as empty. It turned its gaze on the real Orihime. Santen Keshun. Orihime cried out, her shield snapping into place. I reject. The echo Orihime simply sm. I led and reached out to touch the shield. It didn't try to break it. You reject my attack, the voice whispered. But I am the rejection. I am the echo of what was. How can you reject the past itself? The Santen Keshun, the shield that had stopped the hollow's cataclysmic blow, flickered violently. It wasn't being overpowered, it was being conceptually outmaneuvered. The echo's attack wasn't a physical or energetic force to be rejected. It was a metaphysical one. Naruto knew this was a fight they couldn't win with brute force. This was a battle of concepts. His Rasenshuriken would be as useless as throwing a rock at a ghost. He had to think like his enemy. It lives in reflections. He yelled to Orihime, shoving his duplicate back. Don't let it touch you. Its touch attacks your existence. He glanced around, his mind racing. Reflections. Windows, puddles, polished metal, his own eyes. The enemy was literally everywhere. It was a strategic nightmare. The echo Naruto lunged again. Naruto dodged, but another duplicate. This one formed from the reflection in a discarded sake bottle, emerged and attacked him from the side. He was fighting himself, his movements perfectly mirrored, his instincts known to his opponent before he even acted. He was on the defensive, a situation he hadn't been in for a very long time. He couldn't land a decisive blow. Every time he managed to dissipate one of the duplicates with a chakra-infused strike, another would form instantly from a different reflective surface. You cannot fight your own shadow, anomaly, the echo's voice whispered, a chore. As from a dozen different reflections at once. I am the consequence of your every action. Orihime was in a similar predicament. Her shields were holding, but just barely. The echo was assaulting her. With memories of her deepest traumas, her brother's transformation into a hollow, her capture by the Arankar, the fear and pain she had endured. It was trying to break her will, the very source of her power. Naruto realized the flaw in their strategy. They were fighting on the echo's terms, in a world it controlled. They had to change the battlefield. He formed a quick hand seal. Shadow clone jutsu. A dozen Narutos popped into existence. But he didn't send them to attack. Smash them, he ordered. Smash every reflection. The clones leapt into action. They shattered shop windows, kicked over barrels of water, and threw kunai to scratch and mar every polished surface. The echo's voice let out a flicker of something that might have been annoyance. A crude but clever tactic, it admitted, as its points of manifestation began to dwindle. But you are a part of this world. You cannot erase every reflection. You, yourselves, create them. As if to prove its point, a new duplicate form. D in the reflection of Sasuke's face on a most wanted bingo book poster that had fluttered to the ground. It was an Echo Sasuke, and it came at Naruto with a Chidori made of pure, silent void. Naruto countered with a Rasengan. The two attacks meeting in a screeching vortex of opposing energies. This was unsustainable. He needed a permanent solution. He needed to attack the entity itself, not its puppets. But how do you attack something that exists everywhere and nowhere? His eyes fell on Orihime. She was struggling, her face pale. He saw the echo's strategy then. It was distracting him, the primary wielder of the finality, power. While it focused its true efforts on breaking Orihime, the causality, heretic. Her power was the greater threat to its master. He had to end this. Now. And then, the answer came to him. It was a terrible, dangerous idea. It involved using the one power he had sworn to control. But this enemy wasn't a living being. It was a concept, a ghost. What would happen if he inflicted a state of absolute, unchanging finality on something that was, by its very nature, an echo of the past? He had to take the risk. Orihime, he shouted, his voice ringing with command. Trust me, drop your shield. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The echo Orihime was inches from her, its hand outstretched. To drop her shield was suicide. Trust me, he roared, pouring all his conviction, all his will, into those two words. Her eyes met his. In that moment, her fear was overcome by her absolute faith in him. She took a shuddering breath and did the impossible. She let her Santen Kesshun dissolve. The echo Orihime's hand shot forward, its fingers touching her forehead. It is done, the voice whispered, a note of triumph in its tone. The heresy is unwritten. But Naruto was already moving. He wasn't targeting the duplicate. He was targeting its source. He ignored the dozen other echoes, focusing his every sense, his every ounce of will, on the single conceptual link that connected them all. It was a web, and he was going for the spider. He appeared in front of Orihime, placing himself between her and the duplicate, his back to the echo. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He reached up, his hand moving with slow, deliberate purpose. He placed his open palm flat against the back of his own head. And he unleashed his power. Not outward, but inward. He channeled the cold, dead, absolute finality of his curse, not into his body, but into his own reflection. Into the image of himself that existed in the world. Into the very concept of his own echo. He was rejecting the reflection. He was making the state of not having a reflection an absolute, permanent truth for himself. The effect was instantaneous and utterly bizarre. A wave of pure, black, silent energy erupted from him. The echo Orihime that was touching Orihime's forehead shrieked, a sound of pure static and dissolving data. It hadn't been attacking her, it had been trying to access her past through him. Through their bond, and it had just touched the raw, weaponized power of annihilation. Every single duplicate, the Narutos, the Orihimes, the Sasukes, froze. Their forms began to flicker. Like a bad television signal. The voice of the echo screamed in their minds, no longer calm and philosophical, but filled with a digital-sounding agony. What have you done? You cannot attack me. I am a concept. Quote, so is this, Naruto grunted, the strain immense. He was wrestling with a fundamental law of reality. By targeting his own reflection, he had targeted the domain of his enemy. By inflicting his curse on that concept, he had poisoned the well from which the echo drew its existence. A reflection is a type of echo. He had given the echo an ending. My connection. My manifestation. You've severed it. The echo shrieked. You have inflicted a finality upon a memory. It is a paradox. It cannot be. The duplicates dissolved, not into dust, but into scrambled pixels of gray light. The silent, colorless world they were trapped in began to flicker. The sounds and colors of the market district bled back in, distorted and strange. With a final, agonized scream that echoed into nothingness. The echo was gone, banished. Its ability to manifest in this reality, to use reflections as its anchor, had been permanently and absolutely severed. The world snapped back to normal. The sounds, the smells, the colors of the market rushed back in. A vendor yelled about the price of fish. A child laughed. Naruto and Orihime stood in the middle of the street, breathing heavily. The entire battle having taken place in the space between 1 second and the next. No one had seen a thing. Orihime swayed, her ordeal having left her drained. Naruto caught her, his arms wrapping around her securely. Are you okay? He asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. She nodded against his chest, her hands clutching the front of his jacket. It was in my head. It was showing me, she shuddered. He held her tighter. It's gone now. It can't come back. As she steadied herself, she pulled back slightly and looked at him. Then she looked past him, at a shop window that his clones had missed. She gasped, Naruto-kun, your reflection. He turned and looked. The glass was perfectly polished, reflecting the street, the stalls, and Orihime with perfect clarity. But where his own reflection should have been, there was nothing, just an empty space in the world. He was a void in the mirror. He had defeated the echo. But the price was a piece of his own existence. He had weaponized his curse and carved a piece of himself out of reality to do it. He looked at his hand, then back at the empty space in the mirror. The victory was absolute. The cost was profound, and the message was clear. This was just the beginning. The king's silent blade had been turned aside, but the king himself was still out there. And he was no longer sending messages. Next time, he would come himself. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Vows Forged in Twilight. The battle with the echo left a scar, not on their bodies, but on their reality. Naruto Uzumaki, the most famous face in the world, no longer had a reflection. It was a deeply unsettling, secret weirdness in a life already full of them. A puddle of water on the street would show the sky, but not the man walking under it. A polished kunai would reflect the hand holding it, but not the face of its owner. He had become a ghost in the mirror, a constant, visual reminder of the conceptual war they were now fighting. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of frantic, high-level meetings. Naruto and Orihime, exhausted but resolute, recounted the entire event to the inner circle: Kakashi, Tsunade, Shikamaru, and Sasuke. The room was thick, with a tension far heavier than any threat from rogue shinobi had ever produced. Kokuo, the sovereign of annihilation, Shikamaru repeated, the name tasting foreign and heavy on his tongue. He dragged a hand down his face. The very definition of weary. So, it's not just some monster of the week. We've attracted the attention of a god. Or something that thinks it's one. What a total drag. Tsunade paced the room, her usual fiery demeanor replaced by grim, calculating fury. A being whose purpose is to enforce the end. And it believes Naruto's power is a stolen piece of its own, and Orihime's is a heresy that unravels reality. This is beyond any political or military threat we've ever faced. This is a fundamental conflict of existence. Sasuke, who had been listening with his typical stoic silence, finally spoke. His gaze fixed on Naruto. You weaponized it. The curse. You inflicted it on a concept and won. It wasn't a question or an accusation. It was a statement of fact, tinged with a reluctant, grudging respect. But you paid a price. He glanced towards a polished tea kettle on the table, which pointedly did not reflect the blonde shinobi sitting beside it. Naruto met his friend's gaze. I did what I had to do. His voice was quiet, devoid of bravado. The act had cost him, but seeing Orihime safe, the memory of the echo's violation fading from her eyes, made the price feel small. The true weight of the conflict settled upon them all. This wasn't a war they could win by amassing an army or developing a new jutsu. How do you fight a philosophical absolute? How do you strategize against a being who views your very right to exist as a flaw in the universe? The attack had changed everything for Naruto and Orihime. The threat was no longer an abstract boogeyman from another dimension, it had a name, a philosophy, and an implacable will. They were the targets. Their bond, the strange, harmonious paradox of their opposing powers, was the source of the conflict. The world wasn't in danger because of them. But any attack on them would endanger the world. This shared threat, this cosmic bullseye painted on their backs, didn't drive them apart. It fused them together. In the days following the battle with the Echo, the small, comfortable spaces of their domestic life became a fortress. The world outside was filled with unimaginable dangers and existential dread. But within the walls of Naruto's apartment, with Orihime humming softly as she tried to cook, a venture that often required Naruto to surreptitiously use a shadow clone to fix her bizarre culinary experiments, there was a profound sense of peace. It was a peace born of defiance. They found themselves talking more, not just about ramen or their strange respective worlds, but about everything. He spoke of the crushing loneliness of his childhood, of the weight of the Kyuubi, and the desperate, clawing need to be acknowledged. She spoke of her brother, of the hollow guilt that haunted her, and the feeling of being an outsider with a strange, inexplicable power that nobody understood. They found in each other's stories a mirror of their own pain, their own otherness. One evening, they were sitting on the roof of his apartment building, watching the sun set over the village. The sky was a brilliant tapestry of orange, pink, and purple, a sight so beautiful it felt like a rebellion against the gray, silent world the Echo had tried to trap them in. "It's beautiful," Orihime said softly, her head resting on his shoulder. Her presence was a constant, warm weight against his side, a feeling he was beginning to think he couldn't live without. "Yeah," Naruto agreed, his arm wrapped around her. "It is." He was no longer afraid to touch her. Her proximity had become as essential as breathing, the only thing that kept the coldness of his curse from seeping into his bones. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the lights of Konoha begin to flicker on below, a constellation of man-made stars. "I was so scared," Orihime whispered, breaking the silence. When it was in my head, it tried to make me believe that my power was wrong. That trying to save people, trying to undo the hurt, was just a childish denial of the truth. It said that everything ends, and that my power was a lie." Naruto tightened his grip on her shoulder. "It was wrong. I know," she said, her voice a little stronger. "But for a second, I almost believed it. But then I thought of Ichigo, and my friends, and I thought of you. And I realized why I reject things. It's not because I'm denying that bad things happen. It's because the good things, the smiles, the laughter, a warm bowl of ramen, a beautiful sunset, they're worth fighting for. Even if they don't last forever. The moments we have now are real." He turned to look at her, really look at her. Her orange hair was like fire in the fading light, and her gray eyes, so often filled with a gentle softness, now held the strength of forged steel. In that moment, he felt a surge of emotion so powerful it stole his breath. It was more than gratitude, more than camaraderie, more than the bond of shared weirdness. It was love, simple, profound, and undeniable. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but the final, solid locking of a puzzle piece he hadn't even realized he was solving. This gentle, strange, ridiculously strong G-woman had walked out of a hole in the sky and into the hole in his life, and had made it whole. "Orihime," he said, his voice thick. She looked up at him, and she must have seen it in his eyes, because her own went wide. And a soft blush crept up her cheeks. He didn't know how to say the words. He was good at grand speeches to rally an army, but this was different. This was terrifying and wonderful, and he was fumbling. So, he did what he always did when words failed him. He acted. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic, passionate kiss like the ones in Jiraiya's novels. It was soft, hesitant at first, then firm and sure. It was a kiss that tasted of salt from her unshed tears and the cool evening air. It was a confirmation of everything that had gone and spoken between them. When he pulled back, their foreheads rested against each other, their breath mingling in the twilight. "I love you," he whispered, the words finally finding their way out. It felt like the truest thing he had ever said. A single, happy tear traced a path down her cheek. I love you, too, Naruto-kun, she whispered back, her voice filled with a joy so pure it seemed to glow. They stayed like that for a long time. Two impossible people in an impossible situation, having found their one point of certainty in each other. But as the last sliver of the sun vanished below the horizon, a new resolve settled in Naruto's heart. This thing with Kokuo, it wasn't going to go away. Their lives would never be normal. They would be hunted, tested, and pushed to their limits. They couldn't plan for a quiet future, for growing old in peace. They only had now, and he wanted to make now as real and as absolute as he could. Marry me, he said. Orihime pulled back, her eyes wide with shock. What? Marry me, he repeated. His voice steady, his gaze unwavering. I know it's crazy. We've only known each other for a few weeks. The world is apparently being targeted by a cosmic death god who hates us. It's the worst possible time. He took her hands in his. But that's why we have to. We don't know what's coming. We don't know how much time we have. I want to spend whatever time that is, every single second of it, as your husband. I want to face whatever comes next, together, not as two anomalies, but as a family. He wasn't offering her a white picket fence or a promise of forever. He was offering her a vow for the trenches. A commitment to stand together in the face of the abyss. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling, a brilliant, radiant smile that outshone the rising moon. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, absolutely, yes. It was not a wedding for the history books. There was no grand ceremony, no procession through the village, no crowd of adoring well-wishers. To do so would be to paint an even bigger target on their backs, to announce their blasphemous union to the cosmos. It was an act of quiet, personal defiance. They held the ceremony 3 days later, at dusk. On the top of the Hokage monument. They stood on the stone head of the fourth Hokage, Naruto's father, the lights of their village spread out below them like a sea of fallen stars. Their only guests were the handful of people who knew the truth, the ones who had become their family. Kakashi, in his role as Hokage, would officiate. Sakura stood beside Orihime, her initial bewilderment at the suddenness of it all having melted away into a fierce, protective joy for her friends. She had helped Orihime choose a simple, elegant white kimono, a far cry from a traditional wedding dress. But beautiful nonetheless. Sasuke stood beside Naruto, a silent, solid presence. His attendance was a wordless, powerful statement of his acceptance and support. Even Shikamaru was there, leaning against the stone carving of the third Hokage's hat, a rare, genuine smile on his face. The air was cool, the wind whispering around the stone giants. Kakashi stood before them, his one visible eye curved into a warm, genuine smile. We're gathered here today not just to join two people, but to acknowledge a bond that has already proven stronger than the barriers between worlds and the threats that lie beyond them. Kakashi began, his voice losing its usual lazy drawl, taking on a sincerity that was reserved for moments of true importance. In our world, we often speak of the will of fire, the belief that love and loyalty are passed down, creating a flame that lights the way for future generations. What you two have is something like that. Something new, a light against a coming darkness. He looked at Naruto. Naruto, you've spent your whole life fighting to protect this village, to protect your friends. Now, you've found someone to protect, and who protects you in turn. Do you take Orihime Inoue as your wife, to stand with her, to fight alongside her, and to cherish the moments you have, no matter how uncertain the future may be? Naruto looked at Orihime. In her eyes, he didn't see a refugee from another world or a wielder of strange powers. He saw his home. He saw his future, however long or short it might be. I do, he said, his voice ringing with a certainty that seemed to echo across the valley. Kakashi then turned to Orihime. Orihime Inoue, you came to our world as a stranger, and in a time of great need, you became its shield. You found a place here, and a person. Do you take Naruto Uzumaki as your husband, to stand with him, to lend him your strength, and to build a life with him in the heart of the storm? Orihime's gaze was locked on Naruto's. She saw the lonely boy, the determined warrior, the cursed man, and the loving partner, all in one. She saw the man who had made her feel safe in a world that wasn't her own, the man who saw her power not as strange, but as a sanctuary. "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. They didn't have rings. Instead, Naruto took her hand. He channeled a minuscule, perfectly controlled thread of his own golden sage chakra and wove it around her ring finger, forming a thin, shimmering golden band. It was a living symbol of his vow, a piece of his own life force given to her. Orihime, in turn, placed her hand over his heart. A soft, orange light bloomed from her palm. She wasn't healing or rejecting anything. She was simply leaving an imprint of her own spiritual essence, a warm, permanent echo of her presence tied directly to his soul. "Then by the authority vested in me as the Hokage of Konohagakure," Kakashi declared, his voice filled with emotion, "and more importantly, as your friend and teacher, I declare you husband and wife. You may, well, you know the rest." Naruto grinned, that old, familiar, sun-bright grin, and he kissed his wife. Sakura cheered, wiping away a tear. Sasuke gave a rare, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Shikamaru just shook his head, a fond smile on his face. "Troublesome," he muttered, but his heart wasn't in it. This marriage was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was a declaration of war. It was a vow made in the twilight, a quiet, powerful statement to a cold, uncaring universe. It said that their bond, their love, their life together, had meaning. It said that even if the end of all things was coming for them, they would face it together, hand in hand, a sun and a shield, defiant to the very last. They were no longer just Naruto and Orihime. They were a family, and they were ready for the fight. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Sovereign's Gambit. The quiet defiance of their wedding bought them less than a month of peace. It was a strange, precious, liminal time. Naruto and Orihime Uzumaki, the name still sounded new and wonderful to both of them, carved out a small pocket of domestic bliss in a world holding its breath. Naruto took on more responsibilities around the village, not as the bombastic hero, but as a thoughtful, decisive leader. He mediated trade disputes with Suna, his natural charisma cutting through political posturing with disarming ease. He oversaw the final stages of Konoha's reconstruction, his shadow clones proving to be the most efficient workforce in history. For the first time, he was seen not just as a weapon of immense power, but as a pillar of the future, a true successor to the Hokage title. Orihime, no longer a mysterious guest but the wife of the village's hero, found her own place. She volunteered at the hospital, where her unique abilities, though not conventional medical ninjutsu, proved invaluable. She couldn't mend a broken bone in the traditional sense, but she could reject the event of a training accident, returning a young Chunin's shattered arm to its pristine state, leaving the medical staff speechless. She became a figure of gentle wonder, her soft smile and bizarre, mismatched cooking which the entire village politely pretended to enjoy, a welcome addition to the fabric of Konoha. Their marriage was an anchor. Naruto's curse remained, a patch of cold, dead reality on his side and a void where his reflection should be, but it no longer felt like a prison. It was simply a part of him, a part that was soothed by Orihime's constant presence. He could hug his wife, hold her hand, and share a bed with her without fear. This simple, profound gift was the foundation of his new strength. He was no longer just fighting for the world, he was fighting for his home. And his home was the person sleeping beside him. But Kokuo, the sovereign of annihilation, was not idle. The failure of his echo was not a defeat, it was data. The scalpel had failed. The anomalies had not only survived, but they had solidified their paradoxical union, an act of supreme defiance. Their marriage was a declaration that their existence had meaning, a direct refutation of his entire philosophy. The sovereign decided that a lesson was in order. If the anomalies refused to understand the importance of the end, he would demonstrate the chaos that comes from defying it. He would not attack them directly again. Not yet. He would attack the world they fought to protect, turn their peace into ashes, and prove that their very existence was a catalyst for ruin. His goal was no longer just erasure. It was to make them despair. The gambit began without warning, on 100 different fronts at once. In the damp, misty highlands of Kurigakure, the fifth Mizukage, Chojuro, was overseeing a naval exercise when a figure walked out of the sea. It was a man with a distinctive clamshell-like summoning creature and a long mustache, a man who had been dead for years, Genjutsu Hazuka, the second Mizukage. He was not an Edo Tensei zombie, with cracked skin and black sclera. He looked as he had in life, solid and real, but his eyes were empty, bottomless pits of void, and the chakra he radiated was cold and dead. He didn't speak. He simply raised a hand, and his infamous steaming danger tyrant boy technique, a clone that could endlessly heat up and explode, began to form. Kurigakure was thrown into chaos. In the heart of the Hyuga compound in Konoha, a clan meeting was interrupted by the materialization of a man long since passed. He was a Hyuga ancestor from the Warring States period, a legendary figure known for his brutal ferocity and a mastery of the gentle fist that bordered on sadistic. He moved with a speed that even Hiashi Hyuga could barely track, his strikes not just blocking chakra points, but rupturing them, inflicting permanent, unhealable damage. His Byakugan was a milky, dead white, seeing not chakra, but the points of finality in all things. Simultaneously, in the ruins of the Uzumaki homeland of Uzushiogakure, a powerful, dormant sealing array, one designed to be a final deterrent against any threat, suddenly activated. But instead of sealing something, it began to unravel. From its center emerged a woman in ancient Uzumaki battle armor, her red hair like a river of blood. She was a master of a lost, forbidden branch of Uzumaki sealing arts, jutsu designed not to contain, but to deconstruct and annihilate. She began walking towards the mainland, the very ground behind her becoming unwritten, dissolving into null space. It was the same story across the elemental nations. Long dead figures, powerful and infamous, were pulled back across the veil of death. They were not resurrected. They were puppets, their souls absent, their bodies animated by Kokuo's void. Their skills and jutsu twisted into instruments of pure, nihilistic destruction. It was a coordinated, global assault designed not for conquest, but for maximum political and social destabilization. The world plunged into chaos overnight. The Hokage's office became the nerve center of a world at war with its own dead. The room was a whirlwind of frantic energy. Maps covered every surface, marked with enemy movements and casualty reports. Chunin messengers ran in and out, their faces pale with exhaustion. Shikamaru was coordinating with the intelligence divisions of all 5 great nations. His mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations, trying to predict the movements of a dozen different unstoppable threats at once. It's a masterstroke of psychological warfare, Shikamaru said, his voice strained. He hadn't slept in 2 days. He isn't just using powerful shinobi. He's using figures from each village's history. Kurigakure is fighting its own legendary cage. Hyuga are fighting their own revered ancestor. He's turning their pride and their history against them. It's causing widespread panic and dissent. The alliance is holding, but just barely. Naruto stood before the great map of the continent, his expression grim. He was no longer just a shinobi. In this moment of global crisis, the other cage, Gaara, Darui, Chojuro, Kuritsuchi, were all looking to him. He was the hero of the Fourth War, the strongest of their generation. His word carried weight. He had, in effect, become the unofficial commander-in-chief of the allied shinobi forces. "What's the status in Kiri?" Naruto asked, his voice a calm, commanding presence in the chaotic room. "Bad," Kakashi answered, handing him a freshly deciphered scroll. "Chojuro has the second Mizukage contained for now. But the steaming danger tyrant is causing massive damage. They can't seem to permanently destroy it. It just reforms." Naruto's eyes narrowed. Reforms? A recurring phenomenon. He looked at Orihime, who stood quietly by his side. Her presence a silent, unwavering support. A plan began to form in his mind, a strategy built around their unique, paradoxical skill set. "Okay," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the noise. Everyone stopped to listen. "Shikamaru, get me a direct line to Gaara. Tell him I need him to move his forces to the western coast to intercept the Uzumaki sealer. Her jutsu are a threat to sealing-based defenses, and soon as raw firepower is our best bet to slow her down. Tell Darui I need a team from Kumo, the fastest they have, to run interference at the Hyuga compound. Don't engage, just distract. We need to buy time." He was issuing orders not just for Konoha, but for the entire world, and no one questioned his authority. His commands were sharp, precise, and strategically sound. He was thinking on a global scale, moving the armies of nations like pieces on a shogi board. "What about Kiri?" Kakashi asked. "That's where we're going," Naruto said, his gaze firm. He looked at Orihime. "The steaming danger tyrant. It's an endlessly repeating explosion. It's an event that keeps happening. Can you?" Orihime's eyes hardened with resolve. "I can reject the event of its reformation," she said, her voice certain. "I can force it to stay destroyed." "And the second Mizukage himself," Naruto continued, a grim look on his face. "He's a puppet animated by that void. He's already dead. He can't be killed, but he can be broken." The implication was clear. He was preparing to use his curse as a weapon again. The thought still made him sick, but lives of an entire village were at stake. The choice was a heavy one, but it was no longer a choice at all. It was a necessity. "Sasuke," Naruto said, turning to his friend. "I need you here. You're the only one besides me who can handle the Hyuga ancestor if he breaks containment. Your Susanoo is our final line of defense for the village." Sasuke nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the trust Naruto was placing in him. He didn't want to be left behind, but he understood the strategic importance of his role. Protecting Konoha was paramount. Within the hour, Naruto and Orihime were a blur of motion, racing across the treetops towards the land of water. The journey was tense and silent. Naruto was mentally preparing himself for what he had to do, walling off his emotions, focusing on the cold, hard logic of the battle to come. He had to inflict his curse, to damn a long-dead hero to a state of eternal brokenness, to save the living. He hated it, but he accepted it. Orihime sensed his inner turmoil. As they paused on a high branch, the sea just visible on the horizon, she reached out and took his hand. "You're not a monster, Naruto-kun," she said softly, as if reading his mind. "You're a husband protecting his world. You're the shield for everyone else. Let me be the shield for you." Her words cut through his grim focus, a warmth that pushed back the cold. He squeezed her hand, a world of gratitude passing between them in that simple gesture. They arrived in Kurigakure to a scene of controlled chaos. The village was wreathed in a thick, oppressive mist. A large section of the port had been cordoned off by a powerful barrier jutsu, inside which a massive, chibi-like figure made of water and oil was continuously swelling and exploding, each blast shaking the entire village. Chojuro, his face etched with exhaustion, was holding back the puppet of his village's founder, his twin swords Haramakare clashing against the second Mizukage's water gun techniques. "Naruto! Orihime dono!" Chojuro yelled, relief evident in his voice as he parried a high-pressure water jet that could slice through steel. "We can't stop the clone. And Genjutsu-sama, he doesn't tire. We'll handle it," Naruto shouted back. "Focus on protecting your people. Orihime, now." Orihime didn't hesitate. She flew into the air, her 6 spirits fluttering to life. "Soden Kishin," she called out, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. The golden-orange shield of her power expanded, not to heal or defend, but to envelop the entire area where the steaming danger tyrant was rampaging. The clone swelled, reaching critical mass, and exploded in a massive, fiery blast. "I reject," Orihime declared, her will a tangible force. The explosion happened. The force, the heat, the sound, it was all real. But as the smoke cleared, the clone did not reform. The swirling water and oil lay inert on the ground, lifeless. She hadn't stopped the explosion, she had rejected the event of its regeneration. She introduced a full stop to its endless cycle. The shinobi of Kiri stared in stunned silence. A problem that had baffled them for hours was solved in seconds. With the clone dealt with, all attention turned to the second Mizukage. The puppet, sensing the change, turned its empty, void-filled eyes toward Orihime, recognizing her as the source of the interference. It abandoned its fight with Chojuro and shot toward her. Its fingers pointed. "Water gun. 2 guns." It rasped, its voice a dry, dead echo. 2 jets of water, compressed to the point of being solid, shot toward Orihime. "Not on my watch." Naruto was a golden flash. He appeared in front of Orihime, a truth-seeking orb expanding into a shield that effortlessly deflected the attack. He landed between the puppet and his wife, his expression cold and hard. "You're not Genjutsu Hazuka," Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're just a doll, and I'm going to break you." The puppet showed no emotion. It engaged Naruto in a furious battle of ninjutsu. It was a master of water release, its jutsu fluid and deadly. But Naruto was on another level. He was the hero of the 4th Great Ninja War, a master of 6 Paths Sage Mode. He countered every attack, his movements economical and overwhelmingly powerful. But he couldn't destroy it. Every tailed beast Rasenshuriken that tore it apart was met with instant reformation. The Vo, it that animated it simply pulled the pieces back together. Killing it was impossible. Naruto knew what he had to do. He dodged under a wide-sweeping water dragon, closed the distance in a heartbeat, and did exactly what he had done to Orochimaru's experiment. He touched it, his open palm pressed against the puppet's chest. The black, crackling energy of his curse, the power of absolute finality, poured into the puppet's form. The effect was different this time. The puppet was not a living being with a healing factor. It was a construct of dead matter animated by Kokuo's void. Naruto's power didn't inflict unhealing wounds. It inflicted a state of unreforming stasis. The puppet froze, its arm outstretched. The void energy that held it together was being negated, its purpose denied. Cracks began to form all over its body. Not the cracks of something breaking, but black, dead fissures from which no light escaped. It was as if its very existence was being permanently corrupted. The puppet of the second Mizukage, a legendary figure, was reduced to a statue of eternally broken matter, frozen in its last moment of aggression. It was defeated, neutralized. Naruto pulled his hand back, a bitter taste in his mouth. He had saved the village. But the act of using his power, this cold, absolute authority over endings, left him feeling hollow. He had become a world leader, a commander, a strategist. He had saved a nation. But to do so, he had to become the very thing he feared, a wielder of a power that did not create or protect, but only ended. As the shinobi of Kurigakure cheered, celebrating their salvation, Naruto turned and looked at Orihime. She wasn't cheering. She was looking at him, her eyes filled with love, pride, and a deep, shared understanding of the weight he now carried. Their victory was absolute, but they both knew this was just one move in a much larger, more terrifying game. Kokuo had shown his hand. He was willing to burn the entire world to prove his point. And Naruto and Orihime were the only ones who could stand against the fire. Chapter 7 End.